Hello, and welcome to Classroom Closet. My name is Reg, and today we are going to take a look at World Civilizations, the Global Experience from Pearson. This is the fifth edition of this textbook. This is also, I believe, an AP edition textbook. I don't think we have the teacher's edition, but we'll find out when we survey and scan it together. This book was done in 2007. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to obviously take a look at the credibility of the source and hopefully determine that it's good, and we'll find some utility in it and be able to use it in our classroom and generate an activity together. From that, we'll also evaluate what I call the GDM of the source, which stands for how we can take generosity, discipline, and meditation, our foundations of education, and implement them or extract them from the resource. So, without further ado, let us dive into the textbook together. Okay, so here we are with the textbook. Again, it's the AP edition. Here's our authors. It's World Civilizations, The Global Experience, 5th edition. I'm warning you now, as I chose this textbook for this episode today, it felt like it was falling apart as I picked it up. So this could be interesting as we open it up. Let's take a look. Okay, yeah, it is falling apart already, as you can see. So what I'm going to do is I am going to take these two portions out, and then we'll go through these because I'm pretty sure this is only the table of contents. Yeah. So um, I'll put all the publication information and the copyright. Again, this is a Pearson Longman textbook, and the title is World Civilizations, The Global Experience, AP Edition, 5th edition. So give me a second. We'll go into these two materials, and then we'll get started. All right, so we are back in here with those two pieces you saw. The first of which is a teacher to teacher address or note from what looks like one of the authors. One of the things I liked about this as I perused it or just kind of scanned it was this note here. This textbook allows a teacher to make the decisions about pacing and selection. It's great that a textbook's aware of this because as a teacher, I always was hesitant or kind of trepidatious, if you will, to totally rely on a textbook. I felt like textbooks were, yes, they were my curriculum guide. Yes, I needed to use them in the course. But they were just that. They were the guide, right? They were the guide to the content, and I was to make a map and develop objectives for students. So it's great that this author takes note of that here in the beginning and allows us or has that perspective or approach when they put together this textbook. So good first note, little pro there, little checkbox. As we continue here, ooh, this is nice. Now, these are the topics from the AP World History exam and how they correlate to this textbook specifically. Again, this is as of 2007 though, so things have changed. Keep that in mind. Great that this is here though. So if you were a teacher who maybe found this in their closet and it wasn't necessarily the primary textbook you were tasked to use, you could scan this potentially and say, okay, I needed information or just material on post-classical era, right? I needed some questions of periodization or the nature and causes of changes, so on and so forth. And then you could go right to those pages and then get the material or the information you need. So great that it's here. Also great for students to in their studying, if they needed to brush up on something, they could go right to the topic and create flashcards or reread it. So it's great that this is here, and it's great that it outlines the entire book, right? That's awesome. Two pros in a row. So as we're surveying and scanning, two things that I really liked, and then it goes into the preface. Now, as a teacher on the daily grind, you're not reading the preface of every book, but I always would refer to a preface, especially if I questioned the textbook at any point, right? So in this case, it's great that they talk about their approach. So if I did have a question, right, when I came up to some material in their text, I could go back to seeing this preface and say, okay, here's how they approached it, and that's why it's presented a certain way. I could also get some broader understanding for when they do talk about theme or how they use periodization. So this was always something that, again, I didn't read every preface of every textbook I've ever seen, or ever used, excuse me. But if I ever had a question, I would come back to it. So it's great that this stuff is included if you do have a question about their approach or about the themes that are being discussed. As we continue, it then goes into the features, which is great. So the features that are specific to this textbook. The first of which is document-based questions. This jumps right off the page at me. This is something I would really like to kind of find if we can, and see if we can update and kind of bring it to the virtual classroom. So we'll keep an eye out for these DBQs. The next part is the new, they talk about is introductions. Oh boy, I'm sure students love that, right? More reading. But for us, that could be more information we could use to introduce a topic. So that's something we'll take a look at. It also talks about their global retrospectives. Global stuff from book of 2007. Just keep that in mind. When I talk globalization, I always did it kind of year to year. And also if you're teaching history or social studies, a lot of this stuff, the global context has changed, right? So just keep that in mind as you're perusing these older sources and materials. As it continues here, they do have chapter introductions, which again, whew, wow. Not only do you get to read a part introduction, you get to read an introduction to the chapter as well. As teachers, we're giddy, right? We're looking at, this is just more material potentially for me to utilize, right? Generate a PowerPoint from so that I can introduce it and so on and so forth. But for students, this might be a red flag. So just keep that in mind. We'll have to keep an eye on how they do the parts and the chapter introductions as we move forward. It also takes note of the icons that we'll see and what they mean, right? What the map icon referring to interactive maps with head notes, so on and so forth, which is great. It's awesome. It also has sectioning opening focal points. So this, as we can see, we'll see a blue heading, and then under that will be the focal point. Each main chapter heading identify for students the principal points to be explored in the section. So great for students to be able to kind of, okay, if I have to take notes on this section, I'll look at the principal points, and then I can just add a detail to that. So it's a good feature. It's great that they have that. We'll see how it's executed when we get into the chapter. Visualizing the past is next. Interesting. Oh boy, I hope there are more interesting diagrams than that, but we'll see. All right, so that's the preface from what it looks like. Oh, there's the documents that we'll be seeing. Hopefully we'll get a closer look at that. Global connections. As I said, when you're talking about global stuff, keep in mind the date of your textbook. And then it goes into some acknowledgments there at the end. Supplemental material. And then about the authors. And then we have a prologue. So this is their, first steps into their textbook, right? Emergence of world history, what civilization means, and how they're kind of in their framework and how they're moving forward. And then it goes into the part introductions that they alluded to. So part 1 is going to talk about hunting and gathering to civilization, so 2.5 million to 1000 BCE and those origins. So this is a broad span of time, so it's good to have a general introduction when you're talking about such a broad spectrum of time. I do wish there was some more bold-faced terms, maybe something a little bit more interesting here, but again, it's good to have. Some maps, though, to show those spread of agriculture and early centers of Civ. And then a timeline. Nice timeline above that spans both pages and then into a breakout of 2 subheadings. This is something that you might use to really, maybe you have a different activity, though, to generate or to trick start your course, if you will. But if you're looking for materials, there might be something here that you can utilize in terms of content or in terms of a visual aid like this timeline. Talks about continuity as well. And look at this. It also has a social kind of part of the introduction in terms of daily life and the impact on children. So good maybe cross comparison. Maybe you can find a way in terms of, depending on the age group that you're teaching, a way in that way. So good stuff. And then finally, ooh, there we go. Meat and potatoes time, kids. Here's chapter 1. Rough start? No, it's an okay start. We have a nice big bold heading. We do have the sidebar of information, which is great to have. Those are those focal points, which I'm assuming we're going to go into more detail as we get into the subheadings as well. And then it kind of has those little pop-outs, things that we need to take a look at where those icons that correlate with the icons, visualizing the past, the document, the in-depth, and then the global connections. So not too bad, not too bad. So I don't like that I don't see any bold terms, but I'm assuming this is just an introduction, so I'll let it slide. As we move to the next page, we do see something a little bit more engaging. We do have a picture to start us off, and then we go into, there's their heading with the subheading and focal point. So great touch, great touch. Great for students, as I said earlier. And again, oh, this is nice too, short kind of sections, short and condensed. I like that. There's some bold-faced terms which can be utilized as well, and then we have a further subheading within those kind of blue headings as well. Again, that's good for breaking down if you're trying to generate a PowerPoint from this chapter or section. If you're a student taking notes on this section, it's good to have those little breaks in addition to your big heading, your focal point, and then another subheading. Bold terms are sprinkled in there as well. So nice job, nicely done so far. But as I page on, as we continue, we're about 13 pages in now. I would like to see some more pop-outs, something a little bit more interactive jumping off the page. This is a little dense, and I know it's AP, but still, we live in a world now where we can present more visually engaging material for students no matter the age group. So we might as well. And again, this is from 2007, so just keep that in mind. So I'm hoping that textbooks nowadays are a little bit more visually engaging, especially if you're a publisher. So as we continue here, we have more pictures, and then we go into one of their map activities. But I see here we're getting to the end of this one. Let's move to the next. And we found it. The thing we were hunting for the entire time, which is the document-based section or the document-based question, or questions. From what it looks like, they have an introduction to the document, and then they have excerpts of Hammurabi's code law that follows, and then their questions that they're going to choose to utilize or suggest to be asked. I like this. I think this is something that we could maybe potentially use. So overall, the material looks pretty interesting, something that we might be able to use. But let's go back over to our slideshow real quick and wrap up our survey and scan and see how we're going to move forward together. Okay, so here we are back at our slideshow here. And we just finished our survey and scan. So let's take a recap of what we just looked at. Overall, I found that it was a really positive perspective. Remember the note to the teacher in the beginning, and also the recognition of kind of just using this as a guide and not to pace your class directly around it. Love the AP topic correlation. Right after that note from teacher to teacher, we saw each AP topic and how it correlated with this textbook specifically. So very positive. Love the document-based question integration, which is what we're going to follow up on in just a second. But there were some cons, right? It's visually disengaging at times. We didn't go into the meat of the material, so there could be some questions there. It could be dated for AP, and it could be dated just for your classroom. So always keep that in mind, especially if you're a social studies teacher or in the social sciences. Our world is changing so fast that it's very important that we make sure our material kind of accommodates and changes with it. Overall, though, we are going to move on with this source. We are going to create something. So let's do that. So how are we going to approach it, though? We're going to take a look at that document-based question. And what I would like to do is really do like a document-based question discussion on Google Classroom. But in addition to that, let's do a writing component as well. So like for an assignment, we're talking about a written response potentially. An activity, we're talking about, like I said, using that document-based question to generate a discussion on a virtual classroom. So that's the plan. Let's see if we can pull it off. Okay, we are in the Google Classroom now, and I'm going to show you what we've created so far and kind of how we're going to use it. So we're right here on the stream. Let's go to classwork. And again, these aren't posted yet. We'll post all this stuff at the end of the episode. But what I did was this. I created 2 question materials in Google Classroom. So let's take a look at one of them now. So these questions that you see here, came from the end of the document excerpt in the textbook. So again, when we took a look at the textbook, note that it had an introduction, and then it had those Hammurabi's Code excerpts. And then after that, it had this information. These are two of the four questions that followed. Why did agricultural civilizations such as Babylon insist on harsh punishments for crimes? And what religious and magical beliefs does this document suggest? After all four of the questions, however, it gave this directive using specific examples, show how interpreting Hammurabi's law code. And I put page 21 for reference for the student, because that's where Hammurabi's law code was for them, for significant historical meaning differs from simply reading it. So again, how interpreting Hammurabi's law code for significant historical meaning is different than simply reading it, which is the core, which is what you're trying to promote in these learners, right? We want students to be reading for that significant historical meaning, not for a maybe superficial concept. So you may be asking yourself, well, why didn't you just put all four questions on just one assignment? Well, the reason I did that was that so that students could go potentially attack this together, right? Four questions for DBQ in the first chapter of the course might be a little overwhelming for some. So think of it maybe as a paired activity. Okay, together read through the excerpt that you see. One of you answers the first two questions, then the other student answers these questions, right? What can you tell from the Hammurabic Code about the social and familial structure of Mesopotamia, and what is the relationship between law and trade? So again, now these two students have read through it together, and now one can tackle two questions, and the other can tackle the other two. And then the hope is they now come to our Google Classrooms, and then they post it on here, but then they can reply to each other. So now we have a kind of third degree or a third step in the assignment, an extension, if you will, and an interaction of our students, a sharing of ideas. If done properly, this really promotes further understanding at times as well. So from just a simple excerpt in a textbook, we've now created two question assignments that can be used in a virtual classroom. So let's go back to our slideshow. We'll try and wrap it up. We'll do our final assessment, see what works and what doesn't work. Okay, we're back in the slideshow here. Let's do a kind of final wrap up of everything. If you are going the pick and choose route, right? This is a perfect textbook to do that with because of that section in the beginning that we saw with the AP topics correlation. So you're teaching AP, you don't want to use the whole entire book. That's a perfect way in. The other perfect way in, especially if you're picking and choosing, is just to use the DBQs. Document-based questions and document-based question materials are really, really valuable, especially if you're teaching an AP course. So just keep that in mind as well. If you're all in, update and digitize what you can or find necessary. Look at what we just did with that one activity. We not only transferred it or kind of updated it for a Google Classroom, but we also created a paired activity out of it. We also created a written assignment out of it. And that's something that you really need to think about. Don't just take it as, oh, I have questions now to use. Think of it, oh, I have questions now to use in activity, to use in a discussion, to use in this or that. Just keep that in mind as you move forward. So, again, if you're picking and choosing, if you're all in, this textbook does provide you with some good options. As we continue here, let's go to our GDM and see how this text holds up. Does this activity or resource encourage our learners in the pursuit of generosity? The activity we created definitely does. If you have a discussion board or a discussion-based activity, again, we are encouraging our learners to be generous with their ideas, but also in their reception of ideas. So always keep that in mind. In terms of the textbook, that might require a little bit more digging, right? To see how they thematically approach certain things, certain global conflicts. So that one might take a little bit more digging. Overall, though, the positive impression that we got from the opening does seem like it does fit that generosity or check that box, if you will. Discipline. Does this activity or research encourage our students to be more regimented learners? Absolutely. Look at the document-based question. Even outside of the activity we created, it's looking for that critical historical meaning in text, right? So it's encouraging a more regimented approach to reading. It's encouraging a more critical approach to history as well, in the study of history. So I think there's an element of discipline that can be utilized in terms of our activity, the discipline of self to not maybe immediately lash out to someone's comment on the discussion board or on the question assignment. Um, think about those things as well, when we talk about discipline. So I think it does check some boxes here. And then the overall reflection, the meditation. Does it make our students think more? Absolutely. The intent of a document-based question is to be investigative, to look beyond the surface and to see maybe a relationship, a cause and effect, so on and so forth. So I think as we reflect, and again, if you're teaching anything in history or the social sciences, that investigative should mirror some form of reflection or meditation. So overall, kind of checks a lot of our boxes in terms of the generosity, the discipline, and the meditation. So how are you going to move forward? Always think about your standards integration. Then think about how you're going to integrate it into your curriculum, and then the smaller pieces being the lesson plan. That's if you're using this source. If you're picking and choosing, if you're all in, this is usually the way to move forward. And if you've made it this far in the video, I thank you all so much for watching. If you would like to see more from this source, feel free to leave a comment below. Also, remember our Google Classroom is open, and the information to join it can be found on our YouTube page. So thank you again for watching, and I'll see you all next week when we go back into the closet to find another resource.